Hello, welcome everyone to the HVAC 2.0 show. Oh boy, Abby, what are you doing? Is this a
Adding
spooky
some
show?
color,
It's not yet Halloween. That's next week.
adding some color to the proceedings.
Telling us how our weather's going to be in about a month.
That's
Yep,
right.
yeah.
It's a cold day in Canada, like every day.
Yeah.
It's it. You can keep that, Abby. So anyway, I'm Nate Adams, CEO of HVAC 2.0, and that's Mr. Abby. And it's I know how to say your last name, but I'd still totally butcher it. Kantam Neni, something close to that. How bad did I do? Okay. So he's in Winnipeg, Canada. Ken Dean in Athens, Ohio. Jeff Howard in Indianapolis, and Mr. TK up in Rochester, New York. And we are. This is not a background here. We're in Moab this week, so we're out in the camper for a while longer. So it'll be a where in the world is Nate Adams kind of thing. And if we're friends on Facebook, you'll know because I'm posting about it. But like I said, we are going to continue with the open mat format a fair amount of the time, but there are two different topics that we wanted to tackle this week. So the first one is how we're going into a repair, not replace cycle. So we're going into a downturn. And we've been through this before, and I'm curious to hear Ken's thoughts on this because he's got 4 decades in the business, so he's seen 1 or 2 of these. And then I want to follow up on last week because it was kind of fun. There was some discussion on how bad it is to have homeowners pick what size equipment they have. But we're going to show what happens when you don't have a couple of extra pieces of information. So we like to think in load ranges rather than a dead-on calculation. And so those are the 2 topics we're going to dig into tonight. And please chime in as we go if you got questions or comments. It's always good to hear what y'all think. And if you disagree with us, please chime in. That can be the best because that's how we grow and how we learn. So for starters, I pulled this RE data. What's that?
And we have fun fights.
Yeah, we learn stuff. Everybody learns, yeah, and it can be fun. This is open mat. I mean, the idea behind open mat. Tanner's not here this week, but it is a jujitsu thing where it's usually on Saturdays, and you go in and you can basically pick anybody you want to roll with, and
it's a
choose
fight.
carefully. Choose carefully. You're going to learn something, and it may be unpleasant if you choose poorly. But it's not super structured, and you just kind of work back and forth. So this is slightly structured. I at least pulled a couple of numbers together, but I just want to have a discussion and see what we all think about this. So big number here is this minus 24.6. So this is RE data from August. And furnace sales are off almost 25% for the year versus last year at this time. That is a significant move. I mean, big industries like HVAC normally move in single-digit percentages. So this is significant. And you can see that this is just for the month of August. 2021 was 333,000, 2022, 363. And then this year, 281. So that's a big fall off. So that's just 1 month.
Maybe everybody's putting in heat pumps.
Ken, have you
There's
seen
a small bit of truth to that.
Do you pay attention to this?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
It can be it's interesting. Like this is one of the ways you can kind of keep an eye on what's going on. If you want detailed information, you got to go pay for Hardy numbers usually to find out more. And I don't think the price tags are small, but at least there's this that is readily available. Now, one thing that strikes me here is like I'm hearing a lot more about going from 2 or 3 quotes to 5 or 6. It's a lot more shopping around, and I'm wondering if Ken in particular. Cindy Zeiss says Ken just stepped on the mat. I'm wondering if a piece of this is the fact that furnaces often live longer than air conditioners, not always, but in particularly the older generations. Did you see that at all, Ken, in previous cycles where you'd go from selling the whole system, the furnace and the air conditioner, to just one or the other?
Yeah, furnaces can, especially with older furnaces, you could just replace a few simple parts. They could last for a long time, especially when heat exchangers were overbuilt.
Oh, they're overbuilt today, right? Especially the
That's,
secondary.
yeah, that's a hard no.
So
I was
Jeff,
talking to Ronnie today, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm starting to get real comfortable selling 80%ers." And we talked about the same thing. It's like, if they have a good flue, then it's possibly doing them a disservice, particularly if they're going hybrid. It's definitely doing them a disservice going with a high efficiency furnace that's going to get driven, 200 miles a winter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from our experience, Ted, we saw between 70 and 90% reductions in gas use in the Cleveland area from running hybrids. So yeah, they don't run very hard anymore. Or your mom's house was the one that really messed with your mind, right?
Oh my gosh. She called me on a 3-degree night saying, "Hey, the house is 70, but I just walked by a register and the air felt a little cold. I was wondering if everything was okay." And immediately I realized the guys had locked out the furnace. And then I also realized that 3-ton of heating, well, less than 3-ton of heating, because it was a 2-stage Infinity, that was probably providing 28,000 BTU of heat, was probably the load on that house, because we were at design and she was comfortable. So
that one still messes with my mind. You're like, furnaces are dumb.
Furnaces are dumb.
And how many square feet was her house in Rochester?
It was 23 or 400. We did some weatherization and tightened it up at the same time. There was a wall above the garage that had insulation, but no exterior wall. So we took the fiberglass out, stuffed it under the floor because the floor was open to the garage, and they spray foamed at the floor joists, so the floor joists weren't going right into the house. That made the floors a lot warmer. And then they spray foamed that wall, that one wall. And that guest room had been pretty uncomfortable previously. Very seldom was it used. There were 2 guest rooms upstairs. So
Some minor shell modifications, and it became a 2-ton house at 2,400 square feet. So 11 or 1,200 square feet per ton in Rochester, New York. And we've definitely seen that in newer homes in Cleveland as well, and much of the country, like 1,000 square feet a ton. A fair number of homes get in there. By the way, Commerce, California's checking in. Hello there. What's your name, by the way? And welcome. So pretty big drop here, and a lot of this, my suspicion would be that air conditioners are selling rather than furnaces, so only getting half a system oftentimes here. Then air conditioners and air source heat pumps haven't seen quite the crazy 25%, but it's a 12.6% drop on the year so far. And Abby just sent me some Canadian numbers I'll share in a second here too. They're actually a lot worse.
good news is the heat pumps are down the least in that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So air conditioners are down 14.7 and heat pumps 9.5. So there are a few more heat pumps versus air conditioners selling. So that's moving around. And there we are. That is the correct answer, Brad Smith.
Yeah,
1,000 square feet a ton, like
heating. That's heating, not even cooling.
Yep. Cooling's closer to 1,500 or 2,000, because typically we find that cooling load is in the half of heating ballpark. Depends. Like it may not be quite that. The tighter the house, the closer your heating and cooling loads get together. So a bad house, the heating may be 2.25 times what a cooling load is, and in a good house, it might be 1.25 times, something like that, where they're getting pretty tight. Talking cold climates. If you get to warmer climates, 1-to-1 can happen for heating and cooling. So yeah, that'll mess with your mind. So we're seeing a pretty decent drop here as well. And definitely in the Facebook groups, there any comments that you all have heard on this that you want to bring up? Or Ken, HVAC Talk, since that's your preferred forum? You hearing some low volume numbers?
Yeah, everybody's asking what's happened to the calls. How do I generate some business during this slow time?
Yeah. I mean, we're getting into a pretty. I mean, it's slow season now. The furnaces are just starting to kick on. So
I don't know if you have the numbers for this, Nate, but one thing I guess I've been seeing on forums is a lot of techs are contemplating switching to commercial for a
You're right.
combination of reasons. It's always been a tension, right? People don't want to deal with homeowners sometimes, and there's a lot of challenges that come associated with it. So a lot of techs, for a combination of reasons, have there's always been a push up, not a push, but a pull perhaps into commercial, and especially with like sales drying up and leads drying up. A lot more people seem like they're contemplating.
Hey, Jeff, is that a natural evolution or is that something different?
Regarding just going to commercial, or?
Yes. Yeah. Do technicians, after they get some chops and
no, I see it's more of a kind of a control thing. They're more introverted type of people. They don't want to deal with customers. They want to work their shift and be done.
Okay.
Is the type of people that I know that do it. So,
so it's not a trend in the overall industry. It's more of a personality type once they get enough skills.
Well, that, and you're getting a lot of unions, I guess. They're probably pulling people in, attracting people. So,
yeah, but you're right, Abby. I have seen probably 5 posts in the last week about asking, "Hey, what's the commercial world like?" Oh shoot, I forget who I was talking to now. But like we've heard some of the techs from larger companies moving to smaller, because that's usually like a frustration, a quality frustration. But then there's another group that are looking for better pay, and usually the bigger companies do have better pay, so they're jumping that direction. So there's definitely some moving around that, at least anecdotally, we're hearing about. All right, Jason Trammell says, I find that data hard to believe, at least in my area. We're replacing as much equipment or more than usual. So yeah, this is going to vary by market. So this is the entire US.
I wonder what market Jason is in. Can you put that in the chat, Jason, please? Thanks.
North Carolina.
Yeah, but which city there? And this one sounds like Skip Shuey took Jordan Davis's phone. Russell Skip Shuey. Skip is the man. So there's no context there. So I suspect he probably means that, but that's pretty funny too. All right, and Jason is in Anderson, South Carolina. Okay, I was thinking north as well. So it depends where you are. Like some of the markets that are hot. Like it's funny now that we live in West Virginia, we drive around, and if you see a house being built, you're like, oh wow, there's a house being built. And we go up and visit Cleveland, like, oh, there's a couple of neighborhoods going up. And you go to other areas like Texas or the Carolinas, and there's houses going up everywhere, because we're still building the better part of 1 million houses a year. It's just where are they going up? So could be seeing that sort of thing. Tom Leck mentions commercial is nice because you don't have the final details like carpet and woodwork and painting in a $200,000 system, and it's nicer than $10,000 systems. So there we go.
Yeah, Tanner can tell us a little bit about commercial.
Oh yeah, he made it, Mr. Tanner from Mississippi.
How dare you?
Giving him a hard time.
Just because I'm late.
Hey, you made it. Thank goodness this isn't Blue Man Group. If you show up late, they actually shine a spotlight on you and start singing "You're late, you're late" as you go and sit down. So if you ever go see Blue Man, do not show up late. You will regret it. So if the worst it is like, say you're from Mississippi, you're doing fine. So yeah, you're working on a commercial job right now. What leaned you that way?
Well, really, just opportunity came up, and it just kind of fell within the realm of something that I wanted to tackle, and It ended up leading to selling 3 Bryant Evolution Extremes green speeds for the carrier guys, and so it just kind of fell into the same type of equipment, the same type of thing. It's just a heavy commercial industrial application. So
and part of that too was the lack of rooftop unit supply, right?
partially, yeah. Well, it's a kind of a smaller space, and the customer, they kind of seemed to be, they didn't want the cheapest thing, but they didn't want the most high end. And so, given it was a commercial job, everybody was kind of specking, 3-phase commercial equipment. But it was only, 3,400 ish square feet. And so I was looking at some of the specs, and it's like the other bid, like they showed me the spec that the other guy had like quoted to, not the price, but what it was. And he was like, oh, it's going to be a 7-ton, or a 7.5-ton, a 4-ton, and a 3-ton, and a mini split.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, okay, so like, are we intended on cooling the surrounding area as well? Like, what's all this supposed
You
to
in
be
the
doing?
outdoors.
Yeah.
Probably had a bunch of inventory to get rid of.
Well, the thing is, with commercial equipment right now, it's massive lead times. And so that was like one of the biggest, that was the real reason why they wanted to look at something different, because they're like, hey, we can't wait 35 weeks for the equipment to come in. Like, we need it done before then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been
So,
the problem, is the rooftop units have been 6 to 12 months out for a couple of years now.
yeah.
So Nate, can you pull up the Canadian numbers?
Yeah. And one quick sec before I jump to that, one thing on the furnaces that I didn't think about, Ryan Kerr commented on LinkedIn. So he's at Plum Supply in Iowa. He said that they've been having significant supply issues this year for furnaces. So he's like, thank goodness there weren't any more on order, because it was going to be a challenge. And then, yeah, let me figure out, how do I get that HRAI up? All right, can you see that?
Might have to zoom in a little bit.
Oh, you're no fun. Get out your readers, Abby.
I'm getting old and cranky. Yeah, so these are July, so Q2 numbers, so roughly similar to yours for August, right? So yeah, comparing year-to-year shipments, they call it. And the one thing to note here is, in Canada, the way HRAI does the data, they don't differentiate air conditioners from heat pumps. So some of the heat pumps are kind of lumped in there, but ours, we don't do as much heat pumps as, I guess, southern states in the US. So maybe that's just lost in the noise, although ductless is split up. But here, even like ductless is down over the past year. So
yeah, there's been a lot going on, that's for sure. But these drops are precipitous even compared to the US, because we're seeing 25 in furnaces and 12.5 for the others. And what do you see? ACs down 44%, furnaces down 37%, and ductless down 33%. I mean, that's some serious drops. And commercial's actually up a hair. Well, actually more than a hair. It's just the numbers are so small. It's up 36%, but it's only like 10,000 units or something. So yeah, it's just interesting seeing what's going on. But those numbers are going to make you pucker as a contractor. Because like, boy, how are we going to keep people busy? That's a challenge. And on the commercial side, we got Chris of HVAC Videos. Welcome, Chris. Glad to see you. He's got a great channel for commercial stuff, and particularly restaurant equipment, and then freezers. So he's always doing something wild with those. So he says the supply issues on the commercial side are no joke. So Tanner got that job in large part because he decided to put residential equipment in. And Ted, one of your old jobs was basically the same thing, right? As the loads were really low and you ran, was it 4-ton or 5-ton green speeds?
Yeah. It was, I went into the job and he had been recommended a 13-ton and an 8-ton rooftop. And we did 2 5-tons. And they were modulating. So and that job, he was going for lead points, and the electric use was so low that he couldn't get his lead points because he used less than half of the lead model in electricity, and you have to buy half of your electricity from renewables. And even though he was buying 100% of his electricity from renewables, he didn't make the limit. And this was the beginning of my waking up to these greeny bureaucracies where they have really stupid rules, because the lead engineer was like, well, so leave the heat pumps running and open the windows to get your
Sure.
consumption up.
Put one in heating and one on cooling.
Yeah, right.
It's like, yeah, some of the stuff is just crazy. If anyone here like what wants like a great clip of something where they think it's dumb, there's a wonderful scene from the movie The Glass Onion, if you like murder mystery kind of things. And one of the people gets killed in a dumb way, and he's just like, it's so dumb. This lady's like, it's so dumb, it's brilliant. He's like, no, it's just dumb. And that was like, seriously, you can't get lead because you came in at half the energy usage that it was supposed to be. You should get an award for that, not miss your certification. So yeah,
So,
stuff like that.
Nate, let me step up to the mat, as it were. Okay, I have a
Great.
theory, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong and how wrong.
Wrong.
All right. Next. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking, right? So maybe 2022 was just like off the charts year. So people were locked down for much of 2020 or much of 2021, stayed at home, flush with cash. And so 2022, they spent all their money on, and a whole bunch of people put on a whole bunch of furnaces around the country. And so now we're comparing 2023 against a relatively like boom year. So maybe that's why these numbers look really bad. How does this compare to like a norm, like a 2021? Like, is this is the drop so precipitous only because 2022 was a fantastic year?
Right. So like the last 10 years average might be good to look at.
Yes, it's funny. I'm going to see if I can find that to pull it up. But a couple of other good comments that have come in here. Chris of HVAC videos, loads need to consider fresh air requirements. Absolutely.
Yeah, so in my project, we had 2 ERVs, and we pulled from the bathrooms.
So there you go. Tanner, how many occupants are in your projects? Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, the thing with this one is there wasn't a whole lot of information on the plans. They were just basically, hey, here's going to be a break room, and then here's going to be some office spaces and a conference room. So honestly, I don't know. Is this going to be, I didn't know if it was going to be, 30 people in the break room with, one per office in the second level, which would make it about 6 people there, and then on occasion in the conference room, or exactly how that was. That was one of the reasons why we kind of went towards green speed on this regard, is because there was a lot of, unknown stuff. And they actually switched over to it, funny enough, by just me asking questions, because they showed me the spec of the other one, with all these massive units. And I just went, so what was in place as far as controlling the humidity? Like, how are you going to keep that under control? And they were like, well, I mean, it just does that, right? I go,
No,
maybe, but usually not. I don't know. What do you think? And then they were kind of, banking on that. And I just said, well, I mean, they gave you this spec. Like, did they show you the load calc? Did they show you, exactly what the building needed? Because at this point, I hadn't done anything. So I'm like, I don't know what this is. So I don't know how did they come up with the number? And so they were kind of like, well, that is kind of odd. Like, we were just assuming that you would just provide that. And just in asking questions like that, this is what led to me going, okay, well, is high-end single-phase equipment on the table? And they were like, well, I mean, yeah, we can look at that. And so we kind of then stem from there. But okay, well, how many occupants are there going to be? Not really sure. So It's like, okay, well, I mean, the better end equipment's going to give us more control. So if we are off, if things change in the future, that's going to give us a little bit more wiggle room. And that's how they ended up going for the best single phase equipment you can get.
It's wild. Yeah. Well, and didn't they go from 3 systems to 2?
Well, it went from,
Or is it 4 to 3?
we're doing 3 systems. We're doing 1 for downstairs and 2 for upstairs.
Okay.
But originally, let's see, there was 3 originally, but like I said, it was a massive 7.5 ton, a 4 ton, and a 3 ton. Well, including the mini splits, so technically 4. So we did go from 4 to 3 and drastically reduce the tonnage.
Oh, that makes sense. Jason Trammell, by the way, had a question basically for you, because you might know this answer better than me right now, Tanner. Is Carrier
No, it
Bryan
doesn't.
allowed residential? Okay. What is the warranty on it?
If anything that's ever installed in a commercial application is only 1 year. There isn't no registration. You get 1 year.
Okay. Well,
And
that's
I'm pretty
interesting.
sure most brands do that. I don't know of any brands that don't do that. It's only residential where they offer the 5, out of the box, 10 years if you register.
Got it.
Just register the equipment for Mrs. IBM.
Yeah.
Mrs. Netflix,
Yeah.
Mr. Newsbaum. I don't know if anybody would know that joke, but Chris Matos Rogers, he's a realtor in Atlanta, experienced the recent shortage of firms doing commercial in Atlanta. Our building, along with the time provider, was bought out, and the new owner is leaving commercial. Been slim pickings finding a company to take over. So yeah, it's part of that may just be supply. It's been a challenge. And also John Semmelhack, important note. So John is super nerd. So I always love hearing what he has to say. So remember that RE data is for shipments to distributors, not actual installations. So yeah, there's going to be a bit of a lag after that. And then related question, Ben Reed asked, what's the downstream lag? 6 months or something like that. So yeah, how long does stuff sit on shelves? Ryan, if you're watching, how often do you turn stuff? So Ryan cares, at least one person that I know at a distributor who might know that.
Might some of that shortage just be due to lack of availability of equipment, even in the residential side, since everything's down during COVID?
Yeah. Well, and then parts were impossible to get. Where was that other? There was a great comment in here that was another piece of the puzzle. Dang it. I'm trying to remember where it is. Getting a lot of comments if I'm losing the comment that was in here. Well, one other point that I think is going on here, and well, Abby, you were definitely sniffing around it, which is, are we pulling demand forward? And I think absolutely. We've had more cash in general because we couldn't travel for a while there. It was hard to eat out, but oftentimes the jobs were still doing okay, or there was government money coming our way. And so I think a lot of people jumped on buying equipment that otherwise might have waited another 1, 2, or even 5 years. Because you're spending a ton of time at home, and if you're annoyed by the sound of the system or it's not comfortable or whatever, somebody shows up like, yeah, please just replace the dumb thing, and it's 3% money. That was the thing that was in here, was financing has gotten expensive. That's a key factor in all this as well. We've gone from 3% money to 8 and 9%. There we are. Thank you, Ted. You found it. So that's Chris again, HVAC videos. In 2022 and before, everything was financed. This year, credit fees are insane, so I'd imagine that'd be part of the reason. Yep. Car sales are off quite a bit right now. Repos are going to be ugly. That's 6% of car loans, 6.1 are 60 days or more behind, which is the record for the last 30 years. So we've got some interesting things coming our direction. And Jason Trammell's saying JCI allows the longer warranties, deciding factors if it's single phase or 3 phase. So that's interesting.
So I don't know what the numbers look like for RE, but I just went back and looked at HRAI numbers, which is for Canada, and it's also again shipments to distributors and not installs. And so it seems to me like there was a kind of correction after COVID, and so 2021 it kind of bumped up. 2022 was kind of the same as 2021, and then now 2023 it's fallen off. So I'm wondering if it's relative to a larger trend, like Ted was saying, over the last 10 years. I wonder what this looked like. But regardless of that, like now that we've seen these numbers, like what does that mean, right, for HVAC businesses going forward? Like, does this change anything about the approach? Like, how do you market? How do you talk to homeowners? Or how do you keep people? Like, what does this mean, really?
Yes. Well, that's what we're going to get to just next. But here I found the 20-year data. If this is at all easy to see, or is it? Oh, it's not sharing yet. Here we go. This is RE data. So like 2005 was a spike. That's when in the US we hit 2 million new home starts. The average was 1.57 million from basically end of World War II until this era.
Wow.
So that was pretty high. But look, this isn't the home starts, but home starts got down to like 600,000 or 700,000. So I mean, they just cratered. They were like a quarter of what they were. Then, so this is central AC. So the peak was about 6.5 million. And then we got down as low as 3.5. So almost a 50% drop. And then it's been gradually working its way up. The peak for ACs being 21. And then down a little bit in 22, and that's the last full year that we have. Let me scroll down. Heat pumps have continued their upswing, and John Semmelhack could probably mention this as well. So you can see there's been a gradual upswing. So the peak for 2005 was a little over 2 million, and now we are about 4.2, 4.3. So definitely been, kind of a swing. So things are moving around.
So I guess the last couple of years haven't been as like precipitously up as my theory would have suggested, right? So it just looks like it is a big fall. This is significant then. Yeah,
it looks like 5 or 10% bumps, and then now we're seeing the 12 and the 25% drops. Now I didn't look at the numbers. Let me see. Scroll down. Oh, that's on another page. Furnaces. The one thing that definitely happened was last year, furnaces and heat pumps. Actually, heat pumps sold slightly more units than furnaces. But whenever I see that headline, it kind of drives me nuts. I'm like, okay, so yeah, there's 4 million plus heat pumps, but there's still 6 million air conditioners. So if you're talking about electrification, we ain't done, people. Like we're nowhere close. So yeah, warm air furnaces. Looking at, I don't have it on the screen here, but the peak was 4 million in 21, and then it dropped down to about looks like 3.8 or so in 22. 3.8. Actually, there's 3.872. So in any case, all of this, it's good to discuss the numbers and kind of what's going on. But I mean, the next thing is, what does it mean? What do we do next? And so we're just going to be coming into a repair, not replace market. And Ken, I wanted to see what your experience was on this, because you've been doing this for 40 years at this point. So you've seen a couple of dips. So in the past couple of dips, has it felt as strong as this, or like what's happened?
So much of it depends upon the customer's financial position. If they've got the money and their mindset as well. Some of them just want to keep repairing things until it gives up entirely. You can remind them each time you're there that they need to be thinking about replacing it. And the refrain that we hear so often is, "Oh, we just need to get one more year out of it." And you'll have that 4 years in a row. But with tighter financial times, people are going to be doing way more repairs rather than replacing.
I remember that happening for cars
Yep.
in 2008. People just started using a lot more duct tape. So invest in duct tape.
Well, the other thing is that was right about when cars started really getting good. My wife's car still is 2006. It's not worth anything, but we don't drive it that much. So why get something else? It doesn't matter. It's there as a second car when we need it. Yeah, I really do wonder how much did we pull things forward? Because I think back to GM in the early 2000s, they gave huge rebates, like $5,000 and $10,000 rebates, and they end up cratering used car values. And they got the people that had a decent trade went in and they pulled them forward. So they might have been going to buy next year or the year after, but they pulled that demand forward. And I wonder how much of that we've done in the last couple of years. And again, like you said, people end up just kind of just one more year until we get there. Do you all think this might be better for technician-led companies as opposed to more of your quote unquote white shirt that go in and something's a little bit wrong here. I'm afraid we're going to have to tear the whole thing out.
59-minute air is probably going to take a hit. That's for sure. Just because,
Jeff?
I mean, I think it really is going to come down to, how well can a company pivot based off of whatever their current, like if you're a company where your service is just more of a loss leader, like you don't really make a whole lot, you use that to turn over leads for your install department. Like if that's your business and you can't adjust that, you may struggle unless you're like unless your market is on the higher end of the market of the type of people who, if their unit goes out, they're not going to pay to fix, like they want a new one if it's old, if you've got that type of customer. But if you have a wide array, well, unless you have unless you can start actually repairing things and basically give what people are going to want, people are going to not want to buy things. If that's the case, they're going to want to fix it. So if you don't have a way of capitalizing on that, it's probably going to take a hit. I mean, I don't see how it wouldn't.
Yeah, it seems like
technician shortage isn't going to help either. There's too many companies relying on, I'm sorry, your air filter is dirty on your 4-year-old system. You're going to need new equipment. We can't fix it.
And Chris, HVAC videos has a good point here. One aspect to consider is the requirements that one had to meet to pull a permit. Repairs are easy and don't require the city getting their eyes on the rest of your house. So said like a true Californian, what's a permit? Although from what I've heard, like 90% of residential systems are replaced without a permit, even though they're required to have one. So that's a whole nother story. But it is a challenge. There's a lot more involved and a lot more mobilization oftentimes to replace the whole system. So yeah, it makes me wonder how much that's going to happen. Jason Trammell's commenting, I'm good either way. I enjoy fixing broken air conditioners. So that's good. That's going to be a good skill. And part of this also makes me think of the next slide here. It's changing. We'll hold off a moment and switching gears, but this is a screenshot of, it's actually an older version of MeasureQuick. But this is one way for your young techs, like, look, kid, just go hook this stuff up. And it'll tell you what's wrong, and then call the boss and have them verify what's going on, and then give the client some options. So, but I would imagine in the repair versus replace, we're going to see a lot more repair. But one other thing that really strikes me, there really aren't any more leads to waste. I mean, the last couple of years, the leads have just been fast and furious. And if you have a pulse, you could sell equipment. And because money was so cheap and people felt flush, it was not hard to sell stuff. I think that's all about to shift. So now we need to keep an eye on closing ratios and ticket sizes, because you're going to need to do what you can in the client's best interest to maximize revenue per opportunity. Or Ted, what's that number that you like so well?
What, 82?
Revenue per lead. Revenue per lead. You're killing me, dude. I set you up a softball and you whiffed.
Oh my God.
Come
I was
on.
thinking comments, not listening. I'm sorry.
Did I give you the plastic wiffle bat or something?
You did.
No, Ted.
A swing and a
Ted
miss.
is on the roster for the Blue Jays. Is what's going on.
What's that, Abby?
Uh-oh.
I said Ted is on the roster to join the Blue Jays with how he's batting.
Whiff.
Yeah, revenue per lead. I love that number. Revenue per lead. And it turns out $6,000 is a good number, and $3,000 is a bad number. And what I don't have clear, it sounds to me like most leads are costing the company somewhere between $300 and $500 to run. I'm not sure if that includes like vehicle. Usually the salesperson isn't getting paid to run the lead, so there's no wage associated with it. So I guess most of it's marketing.
Well, we're certainly seeing a bunch of marketing. I went to visit Jeff. What was that, about a month and a half ago? It was when I picked up the camper that's sitting in front of me here. Actually, I attempted to pick up the camper, and there was a miscommunication. But man, I was in Indianapolis for like 30 hours or something like that, or maybe it was 48. I mean, it wasn't that long.
You kept getting hit over Facebook, didn't you?
Oh man, I got at least 20 different HVAC leads, and I just driven into town. Like, I'm not a homeowner, so somebody could definitely stand to pay their people better. Although, you know what, they might. I'm probably tagged as a homeowner elsewhere, but just not there. But I just thought it was wild how much money.
Couple, or what's it called?
Ambiguously gay duo.
Yeah. Ambiguously gay.
Yeah, say no more, buddy. Come on, don't dig any more of a hole than we have to. But you'll never look at a logo the same.
I got the picture here somewhere in my phone someplace where the two guys, one of them can fly and the other one's humping the other one. So
Ace and Gary. Yeah. Stephen Colbert did one of the voices. I forget who did the other one. That was SNL late 90s. Chris Chris of HVAC-R videos saying if you want the heat pump rebates, you have to pull the permits. And yeah, that can happen. And actually, one crazy thing there, it's shifting topics slightly, but on the heat pump water heaters, I'm routinely hearing $7,000 and $8,000 installed costs for heat pump water heaters in California, and that's just wild that it's that high. And it's not a cheap part; they're like $2,000. But if you have an extra day of labor at a couple hundred an hour for the permit work, that adds $1,500, $2,000 to the job for running the permit. So that's one of those challenges. Like, do you want it or not? That's hard. So I mean, if you're talking the federal IRA incentive, it's up to $2,000, then 30% of the project. So basically, if you pull the permit, all you do is cover the cost of the incentive. So kind of a crazy thing for California anyway. I'm not saying that's everywhere, but man, some of the quotes I've seen, just like, my goodness, this is crazy money. So in any case, we're seeing a downturn. And so for those of us that lean much more technical, so everyone here likes to sell stuff. We need to sell stuff to feed families, but we're not pulling hard for that. We would much rather make sure that we're serving the clients well technically. And so that should be better for the tech-led companies would be my guess. But we'll see moving forward. If 59 minute prospers.
I wonder what this does to all the private equity that's been soaking up all these HVAC companies, right? Consolidation,
right?
With a certain expectation.
They're not going to be hitting their numbers, and a lot of people are going to be unhappy.
Yeah.
It seems one of the things that I've been paying attention to this is they don't have a whole lot of incentive to do better than their targets. But if they don't get their targets, it gets ugly for them. At least that's my understanding. So there's a lot of disincentive to not get targets and no incentive to exceed. Like there's disincentive to go better than a target too, because they'll just ratchet up your goal for next year.
Yep. Yeah, I love that scene from Big. Slow down, pace yourself. You're making us all look bad.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it's
The story of Ronnie getting 30 leads and hitting his monthly goal within the first 6 days of the month, and then getting benched for the rest of the month.
Yeah. Huh?
Huh?
They could have given him 10 or 20 more leads. What did you calculate at his closing ratio and job size? It was going to be like an extra $500,000 for the month.
Yeah. If they had distributed those evenly instead of giving their low scorers the predominant amount of leads, they would have had an extra $500,000 in revenue.
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to slow? I remember slow private equity investments in buying up these HVAC companies. I remember reading or watching. Oh man, I wish I remembered. Was it this debate? I think it was on a blog, and one person was saying, "Oh no, a private equity is going to eat up all HVAC," and then the other person was saying, "Actually, no, it's going to slow down a little bit because the moment they see any kind of downturn in this, right, it would just pause and stop." So I'm curious to see what you guys think about what this means for all this kind of consolidation. You've got like Jeff always says, you've got used car salespeople leading sales team in most of these large HVAC companies.
Yeah, it's crazy. They don't know anything about HVAC.
No, what they'll do is they'll get bigger because they're going to go in and buy all of these other companies. So they'll pad their numbers in this meantime, hoping for that turn. If they don't, then we'll see how it sells out. But in the past, they'll go in. This is where the people that have money will go in and buy the companies and start growing their bottom line, not necessarily hitting their targets. But again, like Ted said, there's no incentive to go above and beyond that. Just barely get there next year. And, in the future, if it starts to heat back up, that's where they'll make a shit ton of money.
Yep. Interesting. So you think this would possibly even accelerate it because smaller companies might be feeling the pinch and might be looking for a way out?
For an out.
Yeah.
Could be. But what I'd also expect on the flip side of that is the multiples will go down. So for a while before the craziness of the last 5 years, you'd get a basically 3 to 5 time multiple of what your annual profit was, or a EBITDA. That got as high as 15x. So I'd expect that's going to come back down to reality.
Well, and money's not cheap, so they're competing.
Yeah, unless they're sitting on a ton of cash, exactly. So I know it's going to be interesting, but
like Elon said, just get treasury bills at 5.5%.
I think there's going to be some opportunity, though, if you're good at serving your clients and you're good technically and you're giving them good options, for repairs, and then you'll flip them to replace as it makes sense. But I think the years of white shirts, quote unquote service techs or selling techs going out and, I'm sorry, that's terrible. We're going to have to rip the whole thing out. I think those days are probably getting over, because I've certainly been hearing a lot of comments. I don't know if you guys have seen it, where it's not 2 or 3 bids, it's 5 or 6. So there's a lot of shopping going on. So prices are starting to get pushed down again as well.
Yeah. What's kind of interesting on the private equity end of things also is, I don't know about all of them, but there's been a lot of them that they kind of seem to just operate on cash flow and growth. Like if they're not flowing cash and they're not growing, then they're losing their ass. And so I'm kind of wondering, as equipment sales plummet and they start dropping, if that does continue to happen, those are the companies that's going to take a huge hit because they can't scale. They can't, they're selling really cheap systems at high volumes, just living on this cash flow, trying to just grow. But as soon as that shrivels up and there's nothing left there, well, now what? You've got all this money that you have to pay, that you owe, and you don't have that money coming in, so you can continue, this downward spiral that you're going on. So what happens then? Do they still just try to like double down and, like Jeff said, start buying up? Just, if there's 5 companies around and the other 4's getting the business, do you just buy the other 4 companies somehow? Or, what's going to happen there? I mean, how much debt can they take on before it finally just, sinks? And then what
So
happens?
back in 2014, 2015, I was seeing a trend of more people doing repairs. So if you have a shit ton of technicians that you just go and buy up, which is the whole point of the private equity, is just go buy companies so you have technicians, because there's technicians shortages. That's kind of a philosophy that I've heard and read and seen people do or talk about. Is now you have decent technicians that will stay there because you're going to pay them a little bit better maybe than smaller companies, because they can't compete with that, or they'll attract those people to pay them a little bit more, or try to during these times. And, again, 2015, 2016, 2014, 2016, I mean, people were replacing R22 coils at $32, $35, $4,000 a pop, and they didn't want to replace. So there was a shit ton of repairs going on back then. And then all of a sudden we started seeing this big boom of replacement. Now we're kind of back in that lull of where we're going to see probably more repairs. But the companies that have good technicians that can do those repairs are still going to make bank on it.
Well, and also, wasn't there a reverse occurring? Like, didn't your company get rolled up and then sold back and then rolled up again?
Yes. Well, that's when they were buying. That was buyback. Was
Buyback.
2015. Shit ton of repairs. Instead of replacements, we were doing a shit ton of repairs.
Yep, the numbers cratered. So Tanner, there's a really funny.
Will be an opportunity to go private again.
I think there will definitely be opportunities. And a funny line on this whole thing. I guess I don't know for sure if Michael Liebreich came up with it or not, but he says when the tide's going out, when your revenue's falling, that's when you figure out who's swimming naked.
Right.
Because that is one thing. Show like if sales are increasing year over year, you can hide a lot of sins. But as soon as you go to even or starting to back up, if you don't have your fundamentals right, it shows real fast. So that's the swimming naked thing. Yeah, I laughed at that line too. I didn't want to see that. But anyway.
So I have another question. So forgive me for saying these 2 words, but home performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we can't, if its bottom is being pinched out and you can't compete on price alone because people are just very, very price sensitive, then perhaps is this an opportunity to like innovate a little bit and then start competing on value? So maybe add a little bit more value added services, like, I don't know, doing a blower door test or doing a home audit, diagnosing comfort problems, maybe even providing like insulation and air sealing services kind of thing, like, or am I missing something?
Well, that's definitely one path forward. I question with money tightening just how much that will be a path. Like, I'd love to see it. Yeah, like I think everyone here is recovering.
How much is word of mouth gonna impact? Like, because that's the key, and that's the Elon question of, should I advertise or should I just let my user base grow my sales?
Yeah, there's a balance, but having a reputation as a problem solver. So the key thing here is when price is an issue, you have 2 options, and really 2 options only to deal with it. You can lower price, which sooner or later is going to put you out of business, or you can increase value. Or you can do a combination of the 2. And it sounds kind of like BS. Like, I hated the word value for years and years and years. And finally, I'm okay with it. But it's asking people, hey, like, are there any things in your house that bother you? And then giving them options for equipment that might be able to help with those issues, and not doing it in hey, blue blinky light. I get paid $200 for every one of these things that I sell. It's genuine things that actually make a difference. You're funny. Jason Trammell. Jay, I'm not a giant fan of private equity either. Like, it can be done well, but usually it's not. So the Toys R Us of HVAC, private equity, by the way, tanked Toys R Us. They tanked Sears. They tanked Kmart. Like there's wreckage in the wake in general of private equity, because they pump things dry.
They don't have a
and then they
model
sell them.
that works for downtimes.
Yeah. And that's where you get into where it's important for those of us that, really consider ourselves tradespeople, and we really care about doing the good work and helping the clients. And it's not just the bottom line. The bottom line is a natural outcome, not necessarily the primary goal. So there's definitely some opportunity there.
Same way, isn't it?
What's that?
Venture capital is the same way. They sort of are like, we want to see this growth every year. We don't give a crap what the macro is doing. And so the macro isn't part of the equation. They're extractive.
There it is. Ben Reed, private equity and venture capital are extractive. No value.
100%. It keeps me up at night. I know I've talked to Ben about this particularly too. And we've seen what private venture capital and private equity have done across. I lived in rural Michigan. I lived through, and many people in the community that I called home for many years lived through what happens when venture capital gets, extracts value from community, right? They just offshore things and they move jobs out and suck value out of communities and spit them out and leave them out dry. And it occurs to me that, being a technician owner, like a small business owner, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is like a vast majority of businesses today, even now after private equity, a lot of them are like less than 5 employees, with the owner being one of them in the HVAC space. And being an owner of an HVAC company is one of the few pathways left for wealth creation in our communities, especially if you choose, for a combination of reasons, not to go to post-secondary education, right? And so otherwise you are what they call a wage slave, and you have to work for someone else. And some people like that, some people enjoy that. I don't want to take it away from that, but the pathways to wealth creation, creating like generational wealth, family businesses that your kids can inherit and run someday, are drying up, and there's something of value is lost when those things happen. And what worries me about looking at trends like this is that this is going to put more pressure on small business owners and communities across our country, my country here now in Canada, and yours in the US. And it's going to accelerate the trends we've been seeing in the past few years. And I think it's going to hurt not just our, the HVAC businesses, but our communities as a whole. And that's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a possibility of that. There's also a flip side that could be good in the buybacks for those that did manage to get bought out and have money to get their companies back. But one other thing that's related but slightly separate is not just the burning of goodwill, but dropping nuclear bombs on goodwill. That seems to be fairly common within private equity. Where, Jeff, didn't you go on a call where the police actually got called because they were being so pushy? Am I remembering that correctly, or am I remembering wrong?
No.
The homeowner was really upset.
Homeowner was really upset, and the
threatening to call the police, maybe?
The AGD had put in a system, and they didn't want to pay for it because it wasn't working. They had constant issues for the 2 days it was installed, and the police were there. And they were trying to, the other company was trying to get there to get in to rip out the unit. And they're like, we got a little kid. It's the middle of winter. You're not coming in to rip our shit out. So the cops were called. I babysat for about an hour.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So there's some crazy stuff going on, and the pushing people to replace
really good culture.
Yeah, it's bad. Well, it's destroying culture.
It's developing really good culture in a business. And this, to me, it's like Sandler, like injecting Sandler philosophies into a business is how you can build the culture you're looking for. And because it has to start at the bottom. It has to be kind of part of the foundation of all aspects of the business. It has to be a touchstone that everybody can refer back to. We're not going to be able to do we're going to have the sales piece, hopefully, and create a lot of disasters at the point that they typically start by allowing
Stop disasters, you mean?
stop the disasters where they typically start. Yes. Avoid the disasters where they typically start by having process, but that process has to go company wide, and the sales aspect of it can't touch every aspect of the business.
Yeah. Well, and as we've discussed in previous weeks, like if the wrong equipment gets sold, I don't care how good of an installer you are, you can't fix it.
Right. Right.
A 4-ton system on 2 tons of ductwork, it's gonna be bad. Like,
Well,
there's
and
nothing you can do
Johnny
to fix
talking
that.
about, like, look, we're constrained by code that we can't put in oversized equipment, and it's been 110 degrees here for 90 days straight. So if you want a comfortable house in 110 degree weather, when our design temperature is 94, you're going to have to oversize the equipment. And then the problem ends up being in the shoulder seasons, because your ability to remove latent when the equipment's running low and long isn't great anymore with the new refrigerants. Yeah. So you're going to have dehumidification.
Yep, or reheat, as we harp on all the time.
Or reheat. And
so
that was interesting to me, is like, oh, so they're like, this is consciously oversizing, but having the conversation with the homeowner about the problem associated with consciously oversizing that's a much more ethical way to have that conversation with the homeowner than unconsciously oversizing and then trying to wipe it under the rug afterwards, which is what
nobody would do that. 4-ton mic. So Abby, I hope you are basking in this. So Ben Reed, bang on Abby, value must stay local. We must avoid the Walmartification of residential HVAC. Bad part is, Ben, it's already happened. So we can fight to try and get it back. Or at least make it so it's not as bad. And then Jay Trammell said Abby always hits the nail on the head. So there you go. See, buddy, we were talking earlier. I'm like, you got to come.
We need you here. We need you here.
You say good stuff. We appreciate it. Well, it's funny. I was hoping that this would be more of a half an hour or 45-minute topic, and here we are in an hour. So I'll just tease the next one, and we can come back.
Okay. So we're going to end.
I think, well, yeah, it's what we'll tease it a little bit, and then next week we will talk about it more, because I think Tim might be able to be here. But Reedy last week gave this really great monologue at the end of the show, talking about how everything in HVAC is a range, and it made me think of MeasureQuick in particular. Where you've got this spectrum that things could be, and there's a certain area in this case where it's good. Now, in the case of sizing, it can be pretty wide, depending on the house. It might be small, it might be big. We don't necessarily know, but it's a range. And if you don't have some extra information, thinking that you're
wide.
Yeah, well, yeah, it should be a range, and it shouldn't be like it's 51,275 BTUs.
I like how this illustrates that the range, if you measure, is really tight.
Yeah, where you want it to be is. So, and well, this is for equipment. You know, it's got these really small green spots here, and this is an older version of MeasureQuick, but I always liked this display. So what we'll talk about next week is what we call likely load range, which is if you don't understand what the load of a house is, it's going to fall in a fairly wide spectrum. So like for this, I was just imagining it between 1 and 3 tons. And the goal of likely load range, which is a calculation that is just about to hit the HVAC 2.0 software, it's next up. We're trying to, if you think of a bell curve, cover the vast majority of what's under the curve. So 90 or 95% of likely heating and cooling loads. is what we're trying to do. And it's going to vary. So like if you have an older home that's leaky, it's probably going to lean towards the higher side of the spectrum. Not always, but probably. Because like when it comes to blower door testing, every so often when you hear somebody say, yeah, I can predict what the house is walking up to it, like you haven't run enough tests.
You haven't done enough blower door tests.
Yeah. It's Kevin. Why can't I think of his last name? Up in Minnesota. Ted, do you remember his last name? Inspector, auditor. My mind's blanking on his last name.
But I was having a conversation with Austin today about this, and he told me about a house that he was on, and I'm like, oh, so the leakage was somewhere around this. He's like, how'd you do that? I'm like, well, because you gave me energy use and square footage.
Yep. Yeah. Those two numbers are enough to back into it. Yeah.
So those are really helpful. But then I told him some stories about because when you're doing a blower door test every day on houses for hundreds of days, you go to the house and you get the energy use first and you get the square footage, and eventually you start to see patterns and you're like, oh, okay, so I think the blower door is going to be somewhere around this. And a lot of times you can get pretty close. And then
within 10 or 15%.
Yeah. And then sometimes you're a long way off and you're like, okay, so, like baseboard heated houses can be really leaky and still not have high energy use.
Yeah. Because they don't have the forced air messing with stack effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So there's all these different factors that go in. So if you picture older homes, it might lean towards the higher end of the spectrum. Newer homes might lean towards the lower. But what we can dive into next week, and hopefully Tim can be here. He's on vacation this week. So Tim Nahr of Nahr Heating and Cooling in Lancaster, PA, he ran, these are two of his projects that he worked on, and check out the variance in the load here. So the shell of these houses is identical except for air leakage. It's the only thing he changed. So he clicked in average air leakage and came up with a heat load of a little over 40,000. Loose came up with just shy of 50,000, and then put in what the actual blower door was of almost 6,000, 5664 on an 1,800 square foot house, and came up with a 78,000 BTU load. So if you put in low, you are 30,000 BTUs low. Or if you put in loose versus what the actual was. So
so if you put in average, you're at 40,000. And if you put in actual, you're at 80,000. So it's double. This house was double of, if you had guessed average, you would have been
half.
You would have been wrong for us the other way by half.
So it's pretty wild. And we can talk next week about what it does to cooling loads as well. So like this moves things around, but when you say you're running a load calc and you don't know leakage, there's a lot of risk here.
There's incredible variance.
Yeah.
That the load range you have to put in if you don't know infiltration is big. That's
exactly. So you're going to have these big ranges. So if you think you're running accurate load calcs, unless you are going back and checking with something like an Ecobee and watching runtime, or some of the train thermostats that will track runtime, but they show you how many hours per day they're running, which isn't quite as useful. You want to see the gaps how long the equipment turns off. But if you aren't checking that, I'm saying you're sized wrong. And I've checked enough that right now I win. I'd like you to win, but you have to go check. And so if you can start making like an Ecobee thermostat your standard thermostat that you put in, and see what happens. So for free quotes, when you don't know that much about the house at the end of the day, ranges are your friend. Not so much saying it's this.
If you do a range, you can say to the homeowner, based on the information you've allowed me to collect, this is likely load of a house similar to this.
Yeah. So ranges are what we're suggesting, thinking more so than but when you have a number that is 5 digits long, it gives you false certainty. So that load might be 51,263, but reality could be anywhere between 32 and 75. It's a really wide range. Ted, I see you putting up J trammels. You'd be able to see that much leakage if you walked around and crawled around the attic and crawl.
Yeah, so I don't know who does that. I would much rather just put a blower door and then guess. And I don't know anybody that can guess that accurately based on a house they've never been to before, based on seeing a couple of holes.
Yeah, I've had some just blow my mind.
On that? Tanner, you're up.
How good are you at guessing blower door walking up to a house, even if you get to walk, if you get to crawl around it?
Somewhere between not too good and maybe all right.
Yeah, I think once you've done 100 blower doors, this is a skill that you can a little bit develop. But if you've never done a blower door, there's no way you can do it.
Yeah.
Would you agree, Jeff?
Yes.
Which to me is like knowing that there's the possibility of that outlier where you walk around, it's an older house, you walk around, you see some obvious things, and it's like, oh, I bet this is going to be leaky. And then you test it, and it's like a lot less than what you would have thought. It's like that one just always, to me, it sticks out. And so even though I can go into a house and you can look and you can make a guess and you can be like, I feel like it's going to be here. And you may be right a portion of the time, but there's those ones that when you're off, you're going to be really off. That makes you go, okay, it's not even worth, it's so much easier just to test.
And ethically, telling the industry that they could guess and guess accurately, do you see a problem with the ethics of suggesting that?
So my guess is, if I'm understanding what Jason is saying, right, I don't imagine that he's suggesting that this be the standard practice, is that you crawl around in the attics and guess. I think what I took away from what he said is that if a house is that bad, sometimes you'll notice it. Like if the leaking is that bad, like sometimes you'll notice it. But in a general, sense, of course, you have to run a blower door to get accurate or get like a more precise range of loads. But sometimes when a house is really bad, you'll notice it. And unless you notice it that bad, you're better off running a blower door test, is what I think he's saying.
And Desai says it's so much easier to just test. I agree, Tanner. So there you go, buddy. Now the bad part is you can't test for free.
Ken, do you have a comment on this? You've done a number of blower door tests.
You're on mute still.
You can have a good-looking house that's leaky, and you can have a crappy house that's tight.
Yeah, it's been your experience.
Yeah,
you've been surprised as many times as you've guessed right.
Yeah, you'll get indications sometimes from the homeowner that it costs a lot to heat our house. Then we should be looking for something. Yeah,
that's a sign.
But that still doesn't give you a number.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I've had a couple of old houses that blew my doors off for how tight they were, and I've had a couple of new houses where I'm just like, what the heck is wrong with this thing? And then I had one old house in particular that I think of. I audited it and I didn't know where all the leakage was, but it pulled a 9,000 blower door on a 2,700 square foot house, and my first comment to the client was, "There's got to be a window crack somewhere." There wasn't.
Wow.
And I still don't know exactly what that was. My dogs are barking at somebody driving by here. But there was one wall in that we tore it apart, and I still don't know what the leaks were, but we knocked 1,400 CFM50 out of that. for one wall that we hit that I still don't know exactly what the leak was. I was like, let's tear that off and just foam the whole thing and we'll see what happens. For reference, our house in Ohio had a 730 blower door. So that one wall had leakage of double what my entire house in Ohio did. And I don't know what the hell it was. So you can definitely get your doors blown off. And we'll talk next week about the one key thing that does is it messes with your latent load.
So Jay, I think what you've helped us come to the conclusion is, which we haven't really arrived at until now. Probably people that aren't going to do blower door tests, we should tell them that they need to do 100 blower door tests before they even think about making assumptions or guesses about infiltration. And in the meantime, they should stay away from guessing at infiltration. And I think that will probably make it to onboarding. What do you think, Nate?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you.
That's perfect because it's important.
Yeah.
Here's a great comment Jay's putting in. Newer houses 1995 plus are usually worse than 1950 to 95 houses without crazy chimney chases and the like.
Sometimes that's happened. Like you go through these periods where the houses really have, like maybe in a neighborhood, they built really terrible houses. And then in a neighborhood right next door, they built great houses. And you're like, what is going on? Oh, Nate actually did a builder's daughter's house. And the builder built beautiful houses.
It's gorgeous.
And he thought he
a lot of spray foam.
Quality builder. What'd you say?
He had a lot of spray foam in it. Yeah, and the requirement for code, if you tested, was 7 ACH 50, which everybody knows it's not one of my favorite numbers. But the only reason they hit that number is because they have an 11-foot ceiling in the basement. If it wasn't for the extra 3 feet of ceiling height there versus what it would normally have, it would have missed 7. For reference, my house at the time was 1835 build. It was a 7.4.
So brand new house. From a
it's
building
a terrible
perspective, it was a basket case.
Yeah, what a train wreck. It was gorgeous.
Jeff, the house we visited when I came down to see you in Indiana, and I don't want to name the person's name, but the nice lady's house, she bought that from a builder, didn't she?
Yes.
And it was full of mold and stuff at the time, or something like that, if I'm remembering right.
Yep.
Yeah,
that
was what they.
Same thing. Oversized equipment, just that guessing, that rule of thumb. New build. So.
And that house was actually tight, right? It was just the return that was screwed up.
Yeah, correct. So twice the size of the equipment needed, and
no return.
Ductwork issues. Yeah.
And there was mold coming off of like light fixtures and stuff, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes. Yep.
That one was wild.
Whole lower level. They ripped out the whole ceiling, so it was gone when you got there. You didn't get to see it before.
Oh boy. Well, we'll come back to this and dive in deeper next week. But this is a challenging thing. You moving along there.
Me? Sorry.
Yep, that was you. It's all good. I was just clicking through. We both went to switch slides at the same time.
Thank you guys. Thank you everybody for who
great
showed
comments.
up. I'm gonna end this, and we can all
one quick second, Ted, before you end this. Nate, can you go back a few slides to that slide about repair, not replace? I want to ask a question. We can tee it. That might tee us off for a future episode. Not now, because I know it's pretty late.
There we go.
This one, yeah. Something Ted said, I've been thinking about it since then at this slide, is about like, how do you bake in the right processes and stuff from the foundation of your business? And I'm putting myself in the shoes of a small business owner, right? And in crunch times like this, when you're staring at bleak numbers like this, you said either you lower price or you innovate, basically, is to try to find more value. And Ted talked about how do you bake in like new processes like Sandler or a different sales process, a different way of doing business in the beginning. I think it might be worth really exploring what that actually looks like for a small business owner? Like, what does it mean to innovate? What does it mean to like change your business model? What does it mean to actually go from like, replacing and switching like for like to like repairing or like a different kind of business model? And what do those changes look like? Who needs to be trained? Who needs to be informed? Like, how do you make those changes? How do you make those steps? Like, I think it's a little opaque to a lot of people. I don't think they understand that really well, and it might be worth unpacking in a
Well,
future
there's
episode.
some best practices, like don't have selling techs.
There's other things, but still, Abhi, I think that's a
Yeah, that
wide
would be
and a
great.
deep subject.
That would
So
be
yeah, let's get together and brainstorm that, and have a round table on that. I like
Yeah,
that
we
idea.
could. I don't know who Brian Feeney is, but we could invite him.
Yeah, Ben, can you do an email intro for me on that, please?
Yeah.
And yeah, we can go for that. I've seen his number kicking around, or his name kicking around, but I don't know him yet. And Jay, there you go. Abhi's always coming up with the good ideas. It should just be Abhi's show, and we'll move on.
Yeah.
The Canadians are taking over.
Yeah.
Revenge for 1812 or whatever the year that was.
We can't let this happen.
I'm going to close this on 2 minutes of Reedy last week, and we'll go
Okay.
over to the after party.
Sounds good.
Thank you all.
Ranges. HVAC operates off of ranges. The voltage range is in the 190s up to 250. The capacitor range is plus or minus 10%. Airflow is all over the place. Temperatures, set points are all over the place. We had to ask ourselves, if we're against a range, a likely load range, then why aren't we that way in everything else we do with HVAC? Charging even has a range. There's no absolutes in HVAC, not one absolute. And so the problem really lies not with anybody but the contractor who's doing the load calculation and saying it's exact when it's really not. It's almost as if they know that they're not telling the truth, but they're going to do it anyways just to cover themselves.
Or to make themselves look like they're some kind of a magician, or
Right.
more professional than they are. Or
Right.
Recording in progress.
It's a range. It's a range. Everything in HVAC
Recording
is a range.
stopped.
And if we're professionals in servicing and fixing and all this other stuff, then we should also be, and that's professional to have a range.
It's professional to have humility.
Right. We should be equally professional in having a range, unless we're going to do the things that are necessary to tighten that range up really, really tight.
Very good point. Very good point.